Good morning, and thank you for joining the Power of Intelligent Forecasting, How to Optimize Demand and Supply Chain Planning in an Increasingly Volatile World with Rich Wagner, CEO of Prevedere. As a reminder, if you have any questions during the conversation, to please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now here's your host, Deborah Weinswig, CEO and founder of Coresight Research.
Thanks so much, Drew. And everyone, thank you for taking time out of your day to join us to discuss what I would say was probably the hottest conversation of the past 12, 14 months. And this was around the CPG industry. And for any of us who were in stores or trying to purchase online, we certainly saw some of the challenges that this industry was facing, and whether it was product forecasting as the pandemic drove significant shifts in consumer preferences, but also shifts to buying more in grocery, the acceleration of digital shopping, a challenging physical environment, and unprecedented volatility and demand coupled with significant supply chain disruptions. We're going to try and start to unpack that today, but we're just going to get started. And so very excited to have Rich Wagner join us. For those of you who don't know Rich, he's the founder and CEO of Prevedere. His career is really quite impressive, with most of it being in tech innovation and leadership. And he's really provided, significant value across the whole value chain. And so whether that was in retail, in brands, manufacturers, et cetera, it's really been unprecedented. And so, as I think he was looking at, the challenges that existed back in 2012, he launched Prevedere to really provide companies on a global basis the ability to improve financial forecasts, which, with my Wall Street background, that's always key. Projections, and then, reporting capabilities, as well as kind of internal and related global external data. So we've boiled it down to just 5 trends. We'll have a report coming out together on kind of 10 global trends that we're seeing in CPG. And we're going to unpack those today. And so as we look at, kind of how to navigate the rest of this year, we want to talk a little bit about the increasing importance of personalization, D2C, sustainability, and more. Kind of how CPG companies can really navigate this variability in consumer shopping, because even though we're, at least in the US on the other side of this crisis, we do think this will have kind of longer lasting effects. And then also, as we talk about almost on a daily basis, what we're seeing in terms of the power of AI modeling and forecasting. And so, with that, I think that we'll use this as our framework here, kind of 5 solutions to kind of answer 5 challenges, and, kind of with 2 enabling technologies. And so, as Rich and I kind of put our heads together and really thought back to what so many of us had faced in the past year, we came up with, and it was hard, but just 5 challenges. And so this idea around volatility and demand, and I think all of us were somewhat caught off guard and how quickly that happened. Secondly, the expansion of e-commerce, and while I think many retailers, especially and CPG companies, last year, kind of felt that we have peaked in terms of year-over-year growth, we're continuing to see that even now as we're lapping last year, right? As we've kind of moved past mid-March and we're already here in mid-May, there's been unprecedented growth. And so you've had, new consumers who've entered the stage in terms of, kind of buying online, and whether they're picking up in stores or having it delivered. But also, right, the tech has gotten so much better, and we'll talk about more of that today. It's interesting, this number 3, this kind of decrease in brand loyalty. We've had many companies come to us to ask what we're seeing around opportunities in loyalty. And if you think about some of the enabling technologies, which in some ways kind of disintermediate the relationship between the consumer and the retailer, the brand, that I think has certainly led to some of the changes we're seeing on the branded side, and also an increased interest in private label. We at Coresight spend much of our time on number 4, which is supply chain disruptions. And Rich and I spoke before the call. I mean, there are so many, and whether it's kind of freight or kind of input availability or lack of labor, I mean, it's it just kind of continues to grow. And then lastly, kind of number 5, this is really interesting, is around how consumers expect brands to really connect to them on a one-to-one level, really much more personalization. And right, whether it's, kind of product recommendations or whatnot, having things that are much more tailored. And so if we look at, those are the challenges, right? And then, having the solutions, whether I think demand forecasting was the literally number one solution we heard being requested last year. Number two, AI and digital marketing. So how to have a greater impact and effectiveness on marketing spend. Number three, right, this kind of better digital experience as it relates to and will hopefully drive brand loyalty. Number four, simplification of supply chains, which I think I actually do dream about at night. And then once again, number five, this idea around kind of more personalized experiences. So this report is coming out in the next few weeks. We wanted to kind of double click on five of the trends. And so we illustrate them here. And while all are incredibly important, once again, time will hopefully allow us to get through the five that we've chosen to today. But once again, those align to kind of the five challenges and the five solutions. And so this is just kind of a preview of, kind of our discussion today. So let's get started. Let's be cognizant of the time. And as we really start to look at our first trend here around demand forecasting and how that's enabling, kind of CPG companies and also retailers with their own brand to make, kind of more accurate decisions, this is all powered by AI, and these, kind of tools are really enabling this integration of data and patterns to, really reduce errors. As you can see from this chart here, however, kind of consumer goods firms still see barriers in data integration. And I think, we all see that in our own businesses, right? It's incredibly challenging. And, less so, the challenge here is kind of analytical capabilities. In some cases, right, that's very much kind of human driven. And so as we think about some of, what's moving ahead here, and with this kind of volatility, I do think, Rich, that kind of demand forecasting is going to be an even bigger call out as we move ahead. And some of that is because, and I have to say, I think retailers faced so many challenges last year, and as they were able to kind of improve their demand forecasting, I think now they're going back and fine tuning that or looking for solutions. What are you seeing from that perspective, and how high kind of on the list is that for people you're speaking to?
Yeah, it is top of mind for even leadership within our retailers and consumer packaged goods. So now we're not just talking with the operational teams and maybe looking at individual SKUs, but we're talking with CEOs and CFOs every day from the largest retailers in the world, largest CPG companies. And it's really driven by even finance in many cases. So it's a very important problem, because we now see very strategic leaders also getting involved in championing this, right? We always had the spot problems, and we had the demand forecasting at a granular level that we needed to optimize. But now you're seeing the top paid people in these companies really focus on this and bring us in to try and give them some insight. So it is a big challenge in understanding, not only the things that they can control internally, the pricing and promotion and distribution, and the traditional driver mix models or mixed market models that they used to do, but it's drivers, period. It's the external influencers as well as those internal, because in today's world, the external are heightened, and they're going to continue to be. And it could be from being an essential business or not, right? Half of your store could have been shut down because it was no longer considered essential. That leads to market share. Drifting over to the e-commerce side, where we want to get our durable goods purchased, not inside of the store, but we're doing it online and getting them delivered. And then you lose sight of that market. What is out there? How many people are still buying durable goods, and what have we lost market share? Will it come back? I've got one report says, 81% of people that shifted to online purchasing said they're going to stay there. That would be huge for brick and mortar that are now open back up. So we've got to get more insight into our markets, into our categories, our platforms. And we're seeing even CEOs and CFOs get involved and say, no, we've got to do a better job of understanding what drives demand and what's possible. and that'll shape our either recovery or our strategy to recover or move to a heightened online presence as well.
Well, if you think about it from an online perspective, right, many of these retailers who had solutions, right, they've really been put to the test. And especially whether it was buy online, pick up in store, curbside, or pickup, and a lot of them are, kind of staging alternative, physical formats to serve this huge surge. And we gotta, and I want to encourage the audience to ask questions. I will integrate them into the conversation with Rich and myself. And we actually do have one question, which I'll kick off with from the audience, Rich. This is from Steven. How do we plan in a COVID environment when we don't know what's going to happen? Which I think we've all been asking ourselves for the past 14 months, but really want to hear kind of how you look at it from this perspective.
Well, it's changed the way that companies predict their business across industry. So it's no longer a single point forecast. That's not enough. And it's no longer getting together quarterly and annually for planning. What we're seeing are really weekly meetings from some of our leaders. Maybe it's Tractor Supply talks a lot about their changes. They've become a more agile, more digital focused company, but a more data driven company, in that not looking at just one single point forecast anymore, it's scenarios. We still have to do scenarios because the world is still disrupted. And it will be, even next year, we know, the stimulus that our consumers received, or US recipients had this year, that may not continue next year. So we're going to continue to have to do this. And what it is we've got to do some scenarios. What do we believe is the most probable range of possibilities? Not just, hey, I know we're going to be 3% next year because we're typically 3% when GDP goes up by 2. That's not going to work. And it's not going to be that we can market or promote ourselves out of this and shift consumer behavior back to online or from online to in-store, right? There's things we have to adjust in our model, some scenarios. How many people are going to return to shopping in store? How many are staying online? What's going on with even raw material prices and gas price, and how's that going to shift consumer? Well, we most likely need to do at least 3 scenarios: an upside case, kind of a baseline case, and then a pessimistic case, because we don't know how it's going to unfold. And then next year we'll still see some variance and variability, and I don't think that's going away, nor the agility at which we plan, the frequency at which we plan, and then the inputs or the ingredients into that forecast have changed. It's not the 3 ingredients that we control. There's some external ingredients that we've got to incorporate and watch, and maybe even have to shape those to different scenarios as well. And that's what we've seen the change has been.
So one of the, I think, interesting points, they're all interesting in the box on this slide, is, right, this idea of it's like single source of truth, right? To have one, kind of repository, if you will, where, right, everyone in the organization is making decisions based on the same data. Because I will say, and once again, as people have been remote and whatnot, I do understand how challenging that's been. But we have seen, Rich, in many organizations where, we'll talk to different individuals and they're all looking at different data. And I wouldn't say it's to prove a point. They're just trying to kind of figure out the path ahead. So how do we get from here to there, if you will? And once again, I think it's tech, but there's also like a mind shift change, right?
Yeah, certainly. And there's some interesting cases we'll talk about, because we've got an upcoming webinar with the company about this. The way that each function looks at their business is different. And we've got to recognize that. If I'm an executive, I look at my major divisions, my major business units, maybe major product categories, and typically look at revenue. Whereas as I get down into marketing and sales and demand forecasting and operations, well, we look at it by product categories and families, right? Or SKUs and product packaging. All these things matter. So to think of one version of the truth would mean we'd all have to look at the business in the same hierarchy, and it's really not done. At the same time, there are some basis and some foundational things. What do we use to forecast our business? We'll have marketing that has all this pricing and promotion and these inputs, whereas demand forecasting is looking at just past trends. Well, what if we could bring it together? We could say, okay, well, why don't we build a consensus of things that matter? No matter how we look at the business, let's agree that the same ingredients are going into the forecasting process. then we know what marketing is doing and we account for it. We know what the sales team says and account for it. We know what these external drivers are, and we know some other things about our business that we may be investing in or have some constraints in. So I think the real problem with, one version of the truth is if you're using the wrong foundation, then everybody's wrong. So if we're doing an IBP or integrated business planning, but we're missing part of the ingredients to our forecast, everybody's wrong, and we don't want to do that. So I think the consensus forecasting wins. Bring your insight from where it is, but we have seen companies leverage some modern cloud platforms like Snowflake, and large companies talk about it. Kraft Heinz had some great insights that they are starting to consolidate more. It's more cost effective, it's more capable. And then what's been neat is we work with executives and they say, hey, that's great, you got the strategic forecast, but we also want those ingredients in our operational forecast. So can you help us down here? And it ends up that we land and expand because of that. There's a roadmap for this. You can't just go in, serve one group and leave. You really got to think about, wait, we've got strategic all the way to operational. How do we get insight across all those so that we're talking about the same thing? And there's definitely ways to do it. I come from a very technical background. At one point, we did a 6-way merger of multi-billion-dollar companies. I get there's different systems. There's different ways to look at data, different ways to view your business. But if you can start with kind of the strategic and work yourself down to the operational using the same ingredients, I think you can have a similar starting point.
No, I think it makes a ton of sense. We have a question from Cody. Are there any new external economic data points that have been included in Prevedere's forecasting model? If not new, maybe more emphasized than pre-COVID?
Yeah, a lot of new high frequency data, we call it. There's some soft data and there's some hard data as well. So we'll talk about high frequency. Well, high frequency is just that we are no longer just looking at monthly economic conditions, housing starts and personal consumer expenditures and real average hourly earnings on a monthly level. We're also looking at near-term high frequency data. As a matter of fact, the Federal Reserve created, for the first time I've seen, a weekly proxy for GDP. And GDP comes out quarterly. It's been slow and it's been hard to use for companies, but used a lot incorrectly. But what they did is they built some leading indicators that are a proxy for GDP that come out weekly in a weekly economic index. And then the other piece of it is some alternative data, like mobility data. It's a hot topic as far as, should we be collecting and assuming it, or should, your phone know exactly where you are, anonymize that and send it out. But it's helped us look at, people's travel behavior for those essential and not essential businesses. And then another one that's pretty cool is something called Homebase. Homebase tracks workers in small businesses. So it's a tool where you can get your schedule and see who's working. We can use clues in that to see what's open, what's closed. We can use mobility data, government stringency index, what's shut down, what's not. And then also that weekly economic index is kind of new sources for us. Amongst many others, we're still watching online. Today we saw a report in the Wall Street Journal that says worker shortage. It's trending exponentially. It's growing like crazy. Things like that are good clues, right? That could impact your cost as a CPG or a manufacturer or a retailer that you'll want to pay attention to. So there's lots of great data. The problem is there's too much of it, right? How do you actually look at cookies and crackers or biscuits and say, what should I pay attention to? Should I include mobility? Well, we need some machines to help us with that. And we'll talk more about that going forward.
No, it's really interesting. And, Rich, are there examples that you can share with us, whether it's, kind of specific or more general around, kind of either potential clients you've talked to or clients you've talked to who have found that, demand forecasting has been a game changer or not?
Yeah, it certainly has in lots of cases, right? Because every decision you make as a leader of a company is based on your vision of the future. And if you get it wrong, it's a huge snowball effect. So it's everything from going into markets too late, staying in the markets, too long that you should get out of. It's pricing decisions, but it's inventory decisions, right? So we have a leading, adult beverage manufacturer that did an internal study and said, for every 3% we're wrong, it costs us about $9 million in excess inventory, right? We have to throw away product. That's the obsolete. So if we can improve that, there's a lot of money to be had. There's only a certain shelf life for this stuff, and you want to get it as accurate as possible. You can also look at things like, well, hey, maybe a few months out, we start to wane on our accuracy in certain markets. And this could be another beverage manufacturer that said, well, if we're off 5%, we're a $60 billion company. You know, a large portion of that are cost. That's real, lots of real dollars, lots of real jobs if we get it wrong. But what if we could cut that 5% down to 1% or 2%? You know, what would it mean? And it means that you can invest working capital in different places, right? That you wouldn't before. You were holding on to it because you're off. You've got this variance. And also it's costing you in inventory, it's costing you in shipping. And in retail, in CPG, it may be double shipping. We think so many people are going to go to the store and they're going to buy this, but they end up not, and we have to ship it somewhere else to get rid of it. So there's double cost there. This network optimization is important as well in demand forecasting. So there's lots of great stories. It's hard dollar savings, but there's also lots of strategic decisions that are made. There's multi-billion-dollar bets that need to have more of the right information and need to be unbiased as possible. And we've seen, you know, the companies that make the right decision at the right time outperform competitors.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. To me, you know, as we look ahead on the marketing side, this has been some of the most interesting data, and it's not that we wouldn't have expected it, but when you actually see kind of the hard numbers, right, in terms of, you know, the impact of online on growth of these businesses. And then I thought the second bullet here, right, in terms of how much AI is impacting marketing, but you look at the almost a quarter of marketing budgets from CPG companies that was consistent with those that we spoke to, moved it to digital marketing. I do think in many cases there were, you know, challenges around kind of where to spend, how much to spend, but you know there was definitely this real focus on digital. And you know, as you look at this, you know, do you expect this acceleration in digital marketing and AI-driven marketing to follow, or what are your expectations going forward?
Yeah, I think you would, you know, see a continued growth and investment in the area. I think we're becoming a culture of convenience and consensus. And convenience is, I want to work from where I want to work. I want to buy how I want to buy. I may be okay with buying in a store, but I want to pull up and have somebody come out and do it. You know, and then the other thing I see that happens on the online and with products and categories is, boy, the likes are important, you know, for your products, and you know, just people socializing their experience and what you do. So this digital kind of revolution, if you call it, because of a COVID, you know, pandemic, is something that I think is convenience is important to us as consumers and will continue and accelerate. I think consensus is as well. So the online, you know, investment to get as many people that like and talk about and kind of repost your insights and information is important, even as CPG and retail, because it's your experience with the product now is becoming all digital. You know, you're not walking into a store, picking it up and feeling something. You may be looking online and saying that other people like it. You know, what is some of the information about it that I think there's a lot we have to invest to make sure that we are getting individuals to talk about and really share their experience of what we're doing online.
I mean, as we look at some case studies here, question from Michelle from the audience: what D2C models are CPGs progressing, and how effective are they, and what marketing, you know, decisions do you see being made as a result?
Yeah, you know, the direct to consumer, again, I think is very important. I think there's going to be a lot learned. The one thing that we need to really answer the question, you know, fully is we need more insight. And we have this kind of lack of visibility when it's direct to the consumer compared to our POS data, right? Our scan data from our partners at Nielsen and IRI that we had more insight into. We're not getting all those clues as retailers and CPGs that we did before. So direct to consumer kind of causes some concern, I think, for a lot of companies and trying to understand that behavior a little bit more. It's certainly one that, you know, how do we make sure we personalize it how do we, optimize kind of things that we send out and when we do to get people to consume it that way. It gives us some flexibility, certainly, in that you've eliminated some of the parts in the distribution channel, but at the same time, I think there's a concern that there's a little bit of lack of information or insight when it is direct to consumer, that we can't really get our hands around what are we going to learn from it yet.
I think it's a great point. And actually, Bill asked a question, which kind of, I think, follows onto that nicely, which is, kind of how can we use our marketing budgets more efficiently? And especially in terms of, I think some of the changes you're discussing, it's a great question.
One customer, a great customer in CPG space is essentially, once we've identified not only the impact of our marketing spend and pricing and promotion distribution, but also the external factors, their next step is to run scenarios. Let's adjust these levers. And that's going to be different today than it was before. One is you're explaining more of the model. You've got less unexplained things because you may be able to include consumer behavior in there and health conditions and other things. So you're getting a more accurate model. So when you do adjust those levers, you should be able to get a more accurate outcome and prediction. So what they want to do is really help the retailers, the CPG company, help the retailers make more money by giving them the right levers to pull. And they're doing it through scenario forecast, right? We had to implement scenario forecast module in our software because that single point forecast is gone. But it's also valuable to adjust your internal levers, not just the external, not just health and recovery and recession and cost of raw materials, but now we can also use that same model that has the external, less unexplained, and adjust those levers to really optimize what that retailer can do and help them make more money.
I agree with it. I mean, it's really interesting as we move to kind of number 3, and we think about this kind of digital customer experience and how important that is for CPG. I don't think that most of us have ever thought about kind of CPG products being associated with a customer experience. And given the emergence of all these D2C rivals and expansion of digital marketing and the rise of private label, it does seem like it's more important than ever for legacy CPGs to think about the experience. How do you see some of these kind of new technologies, whether on the right, AI-enabled chatbots, voice assistants, anything around automated payment? How is that enhancing the customer experience, and what do you expect in terms of spending going forward?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to convenience and also, being able to kind of understand, what that customer wants. Those tools like chatbots and others now give us some of those data points that we didn't have. You can do text to really translation into kind of indices on people and consumers. So the more I think tools and technology have up front, if it is direct to consumer, the more insights you're going to get, the more things you can test and confirm that could be driving the needle or moving the needle. So I think it's extremely important. CPGs are getting into personalization as well. We've seen drinks that you can flavor yourself. We've seen a giant mix of beverages, not so much the legacy beer, but some of the newer ones have all kinds of crazy flavors that are unique to me, or at least unique to the consumer, or maybe a demographic. Maybe we're looking at millennials and think, hey, personalization matters to them more. Well, we can track this and watch this if we have the tools and technology around it versus just shipping product. So I do think CPG is going to have to apply some tools and technology to kind of understand their audience, as well as retailers, kind of tailor the manufacturing process, the resultant products, more personalized toward those demographics that may want some of that personalization that's out there.
We had a question come in from the audience from Maria, and thank you. A really good question. Are there any major process dependencies, example, departmental politics, other ongoing programs, et cetera, or legal constraints such as GDPR that might impact our customer data handling capabilities?
Yeah, I think we've had a lot of focus, especially in Europe, around personalization of data and de-identifying data, so that we're not understanding exactly who we're targeting by their specific name and attribute. So I think the anonymous side of things is here to stay, that we are going to just have to look at data based on general conditions, as opposed to knowing exactly someone in the household is maybe searching online and sending it right to them that maybe we were able to track before, we can't track now. I do also think the mobility data is going to be scrutinized, and it could be that we get less of that available, and which means we'll have to take a look at for some other data sources. Are there some opt-in ways that our consumers and customers can interact with us that allow us to track some data without being personally identifiable that we can use? Because some of it, like GDPR and some of the mobility data, it's kind of legislation I think that may come out around it, might prevent us from getting some of those details about the exact consumer. Now, certainly, if you can get them, then customers or companies are using them to kind of personalize the experience as much as they can. But I think it's going to have to be an opt-in in the future, a lot more than it was in the past. And we certainly do have to take care and caution that when we get data that's not personally identifiable, especially in certain regions of the world.
As we look at these case studies with Estee Lauder and Nestle, are there examples that you can share with us in terms of what you're seeing from your clients as well on as they're focusing on digital experiences and the impact that's having?
Yeah, it's fun to be part of a Microsoft-backed company. Microsoft will introduce us along with several other technology companies to companies like Kroger and Nestle and Giant Eagle and others. And I get to hear other companies and what they're pitching and what some of their products are. And it's a lot driven around data, certainly, and insights and information. But some of them that I thought were pretty neat, there's cooler screens. Cooler screens are like a cooler within a store. And they are doing ads that actually can tell when somebody's looking and paying attention to them. And it could be, you're looking at a cooler and now you see Pepsi, and hopefully you're thinking about a Pepsi and you reach in and grab one, but they're collecting data from it, which is pretty neat. They know when somebody comes up, where they're looking on the screen, not who they are, but they can see if they're engaged or not in different areas of the screen. And that can help companies understand, did the ad actually resonate with their customers? And did it drive an increase in that store sales when we saw lots of people spending more time looking at this what used to be just a cooler or a refrigerator. Now you have a 65-inch screen with an ad on it that's very visually appealing. So we can see some of that's going on in the AL kind of ML-driven space to collect data and use that to understand if ads really are driving product adoption. So there's a lot more we can get. The mobility data, you can actually tell if somebody went into, say, a Wendy's and went up to the counter or they went through the drive-thru based on the velocity of their phone and the horizontal and vertical positioning of their phone. So there's a lot of information we can get about people that we just didn't know before. And if you have the right algorithms, the right engine to pull insights out of it, maybe you could start understanding the customers better. And you could double down on the drive-through and staffing for it versus the walk up to the counter because you're seeing some trends there.
Yeah, and I mean, if you can be more predictive, right, there can also be, less waste as well. And I think that, as we think about this modification, number 4, modification and simplification of supply chains, I mean, that's really quite impactful. And, for those of you who voted in the poll, the greatest challenge, 40% of you highlighted, was supply chain disruption. And I do think that we are, kind of seeing, and whether you look at, kind of this simplification of inventory, better insights, really, I think improved execution. But, what we're seeing right now, Rich, just is the ability to predict. And, once again, with all of these exogenous factors, is more important than ever. And I think, predicting not only where the customer is going to buy, where to position the inventory, and when, and then as things are changing, being able to kind of inform, kind of those, whether it's at the DC level or the headquarters, how has this changed, right? Everything's changed in supply chain, but as a result, how are you seeing that impact, kind of retailers and brands?
Yeah, what we're what we're seeing, of course, is supply chain disruption and other things, but there are more signals that you can use to understand whether disruption is going to happen and when and how long it's going to last than ever before. So we do have customers that are chassis, truck chassis leasing. We have, people like Maersk overseas that we've done analysis for, and we can understand, cargo ships and what the impact is, maybe if they're not here or there's a decrease across industries and how they result. So there's lots of signals out there that are leading indicators for not only demand, but supply. And you need to look at both, right? We may say, hey, we think consumers are going to stock up again this year on backyard, patio furniture. We see that coming. But the same side, well, the cost of steel is going up, right? So there's a problem there in our supply chain side of things. So we need to look at both and try to find that balance. But a more accurate picture, both on the supply side and the demand side, is really the only way you're going to succeed. Especially because there's more volatility. That means there'll be more misses if you don't change your behavior. If we continue just doing it the same way we did, maybe we have one guy that is buying or at least setting the purchasing decisions for tin cans in our CPG organization based on his years of knowledge. Well, you're at risk. What if he leaves? What if he's wrong now, right? And his formula that he's used for 20, 30 years no longer works. You need some sort of system that's watching for that and giving you some unbiased, hopefully, and data-driven insights on where do we think the cost for tin is going to be, systematically. So I think there's some things there that you have to look at on both sides of the equation, but there are lots of clues, lots of leading indicators. It's really now that we have this huge variability, how do we tease out the ones that we should pay attention to? Because we've got a company, and this will be more in the packaging, and everybody uses packaging, of course, but they're saying, this one type of package for us has got a really high cost right now. And so we haven't bought as much of it as we normally would. At the same time, we're seeing a demand from one of our end-use industries that we're not sure if it's going to go up or down, but if it goes up, we're going to be in trouble because now we don't have the packaging capability for it. So what do we do? And what we found is, one, don't use a general indicator of the overall, country in this end-use market. That we were looking nationally at the end-use market, but what if the majority of what's happening from a disruption is in the Gulf Coast? Well, we could actually now look and say, what matters more is not this national indicator, but maybe we can get regional and say, well, what's our demand like on the Gulf Coast? Because that's a big part of our demand in general. And if I get more comfortable that I'm using the right signal for that area, then what I could do is make those purchasing decisions with more confidence. I'll stock up if I see you get more granular and tell me, no, this group of customers in this region of the world, demand's going to increase. We're pretty certain. It's not just general, it's more specific. Then I get more confidence, and then I'll probably stock up on my raw material or my supply side.
No, that's really helpful. And in the interest of time, let's move to number 5. And this is, I think, we could spend an entire 40 minutes talking about this, which is how CPG companies are responding to demand for personalized experiences. And also we've heard a lot about this idea of creating communities and micro communities. And so it's personalized experiences around product. Yes. I mean, I would love my name on, every Coke bottle that I drink. But I think it actually extends beyond that. And I think there's, we've got recommendations and, because the idea around communications, but there is no, in my opinion, no kind of silver bullet. There's, the consumer is learning to connect with, brands, retailers in new ways. And I think that they have heightened expectations for these brands and retailers to meet that. They need to kind of build these greater networks. And so, what do you see as the most important, if we're thinking about kind of 2021, what is it that companies can do, right? With this kind of investment in AI and automation to really kind of serve these up for folks?
Yeah, I think it goes back to our first slide, and a lot of it's to have to do with data. Get your data together, make sure you're capturing the right data. But data by itself isn't going to do it. You've got to augment what you know about your industry, your products, and your market with some machine learning and some AI that can process things much faster. that it can take the routine and mundane out of that analysis so that you can be more strategic in thinking about creative ways to build these communities, creative ways to personalize. You don't want to be in data by hand all day, right? Deploy cloud-based AI tools and machine learning to find the insights. That's the goal. If you think that data is the new oil, well, I think oil by itself doesn't do anything. You need a match, right? And I think, AI and ML are that match to give you insights that you never had before, to process that data faster, kind of that energy that you need to get insights so that you can be more strategic and focus on the right things and get out of, the routine and mundane task that you have to do. Let the machine do it. And we're seeing that across not only industries, but across functions. You hear about, finance is automating. I think in the future, we're going to see these routine and mundane data gathering and number crunching. Give that to the machine. Be more strategic. Use your insights to leverage this technology and tools to find, kind of that ignition that you need to personalize things or to, take a strategic bet on something because the data is telling you something that you didn't know before.
Yeah, so we've got a few case studies here, which I'll leave up for a minute, but I do want to, as we conclude, and I do apologize to everyone in the audience whose questions we didn't get to, but there's a lot around, Rich, just, around, kind of the model that Prevedere is using and how that's changing and being augmented and kind of scenarios, range of outcomes. So there is like this idea of, hey, it's how I've always done everything from analyzing companies, where you've got to start at the top and then work your way down. And right, it's the whole macro perspective and looking at the strategic element, and then thinking about also what data you want to ingest. And if things don't seem to make sense, right, going back and revisiting that. So, so today we looked at, these 5 challenges, which I think probably every one of us has either experienced as a consumer or as a retailer, brand, CPG. And then 5 different solutions. And, there's no right way to start. It's just, I think, getting started and jumping in. And, the great thing about using, right, kind of AI, ML, data science, it's really rapid testing, and you can see it happen kind of right away in real time. So Rich, I'm going to let you kind of close this out because there are so many questions we just didn't have a chance to answer. As you look back over the past, let's say 14 months, and you look ahead to the rest of 21, what do you think is the most impactful, if you will, area of opportunity as you're seeing it from talking to your customers and your potential customers?
Yeah, for me, and probably a little bit biased, but I think the most important thing is that the way companies forecast and plan has to change. And many companies have adopted it. Those that have been really successful are adopting it. I think in a year or two, it'll almost be unheard of for a leading company in CPG or retail that plans and forecasts without systematically incorporating external data. It just won't be heard of. It'd be almost laughable that, before we never even looked at, systematically or in an automated way, brought in external factors, whether it's economic or consumer behavior or weather data. It's got to get more systematic. And I think we'll realize this in Institute of Business Forecasting said, this is a forecasting and planning revolution, not an evolution. An evolution is a slow changing, an environment, whereas a revolution is, this has been a catalyst that says all of our models are broken. The way we forecast and plan needs to change because external factors matter more now than they ever have before. And to me, I think that's the lesson, and it starts at the top, certainly, the CEO and CFO and what keeps them up at night, but it's going to change the way every function within the business forecasting plans.
I'll just close it out with this. It is very interesting, and you saying that just helped me, I think, threaded through a few needles, is we've seen a significant uptick in large, kind of retailers and CPG companies actually hiring internal economists in the past 12 months. And that, I think, kind of speaks so loud to what you just said in terms of, right, having this, kind of capability to forecast. So with that, Rich, thank you so much. I feel like we just scratched the surface of these very important topics, and thank you for joining us.